Yeah,
I love it because I always do this, and then people are like, "When are we going to start?" And I'm like, "We've started." that red button at the top that says recording means that I mean, I'll cut out what you want cut out, but for the most part, we've started.
Yeah, good.
Uh, but it's interesting because now that makes me wonder, like your approach to marketing the MSc program, then going into this first round, what was the approach then? If it wasn't like, yeah, we're going to be on camera, we're going to do this, we're going to do that.
Wow, that's a good question, and it's going to be a really underwhelming answer of, other than saying to the current captive audience who already have some brand affinity and some trust in the artist ecosystem, by the way, this now exists.
Yeah.
There wasn't a huge amount more of an approach than that. The bits we kind of always have to focus on is the most common questions is this like, is this real? Is this like a master's degree? Like, what do you mean? Like, is this just another course? Is it a CPD program, professional development? And I was like, no. This is a master's degree. Like, this is the same as if you're going to go to University of Oxford in the UK, Loughborough, go to Stanford, whatever. Like, you're going to an institution, you're getting a master's degree out of it. And that's the piece which is always the hardest to communicate. But actually, one of the not reflections, but one of the things I'm consciously aware of is that moving forwards, you have to find new markets, you have to get in front of new people, and that you have a captive number of people who already got trust in a brand, got trust in a group of people, and at some point in time you go, we need to find new people, we need to and lots of things wrap into that. There's the general brand of artists growing in terms of more internationally into more maybe non-track and field dominant people, where it maybe originally have started. They've done that really well already, but continuing to do that. And but I mean, look, there's a wishy-washy answer because we need to have more strategy, and we've been very lucky so far that we haven't had to have that much of a strategy. That every time we've advertised, I think we've had between 150 and 175 applications every time we've kind of put it out to say we'll have a group start. So and then you go, okay, great, but at some point in time that will gradually become a harder and harder group to kind of fill, right? And so basically, like, we'll finish recruitment for this September, and then my attention will then go, okay, we've recruited 3 times now. This needs to have more of a systematic approach to it in terms of top of funnel and all of those different things. Whereas we've just been super lucky right now that people love the artist brand well enough. They go, that sounds sick. That's what I've been waiting for. Let's do that. And then, so we need to do a much more deliberate job about that moving forwards. But right now, it's been pretty casual.
Is there a cap? And it's funny because
in terms of how many students we take. It's a self-inflicted cap, which is based on we would not want more than 30 people at an in-person event. It just becomes it's too like technically the degree is it is validated as an online program, but we put in the in-person components because we think they're really, really important. And then we kind of just go, okay, look, we do not want more than 30 people in an in-person event. It would just water down the quality of what we want to deliver. So we then sort of do the numbers based upon that. But it's a really non-exact science in the sense that, all right, we get 150 to 175 applications, but those are applications. Only a percentage of those get an offer. Of those people who get an offer, only a percentage of those will register, pay the deposits, secure their place, and kind of commit themselves to joining us to study. And then a slightly reduced percentage of that will come to an in-person event. And so you have this kind of guesstimation, I suppose, where you go, all right, if we give this group of 30 people offers, of that group, we might get 10 to 15 of them who will actually lock a deposit down. And then the other 15 go, oh, actually, on hindsight, I can't make it, like the finances are difficult or changing circumstances, etc. So you kind of have let's see what we get, let's let's give the people who are worthy of studying on the program offers. People who join, but let's keep control of the numbers, because quality is number one priority, top purpose, right? We're not necessarily just trying to take anybody and everybody we possibly can for numbers sake. We've got to try and curate a group to study with, and also make sure that people are capable of passing, and making sure that we can deliver the best possible quality that we really can.
This is probably a topic that you and I haven't spoken about, even though we've worked together, but we probably haven't gone into it on one of our calls. I think if you talk to most strength coaches in our age range, I feel like I'm a bit older than you, but we're probably in the same sort of demographic. I think if you spoke to us, we'd be like, yeah, this has been missing forever. Like, this as a concept, how has it taken this long for somebody to finally say and put together something like this? At what point did you say, guys, this just has to happen, and you made it happen?
Yeah, great question. I guess I kind of had the recognition of this was what I wanted to do. I mean, this is going back to probably 2017, something like that, where I had done it within the traditional HE system for a while, alongside some coaching roles, and I was like, "This sucks because of all of these, all of these other things that you have to." It's like anything, right? Like you go into a full-time coaching role in a club, and they'll be like, "Oh man, there's things about this role that are really difficult. That I do this because I love coaching, but there are things which if I could remove, I'd remove." And it was the same thing for me, where my role has always been, or my time has always been spent hybrid in terms of teaching HE as well as kind of coaching various environments. So the same kind of idea where I was like, there's got to be a better way to produce this. And you have the recognition that, I remember sitting in the office with some of my old colleagues and just kind of being like, we do some of the marketing at least on open days, and promote the course and do the talks about the course. We design the content for the course. We deliver the content for the course. We design the assessments. We mark the assessments. You work with the students from A to Z. And then it was kind of like, so the only reason we are in these institutional walls is because they are allowed to do the awarding. And then they take on the marketing efforts and the enrollment efforts, which in often cases is one of the biggest headaches for academics in terms of kind of going marketing. Like, there's always frustrations between course teams and marketing teams because of the recruitment challenges and blah blah blah. So I kind of had that recognition of, actually, all the bits you need to solve here is be able to market it to people in a sufficient way where they can understand what it is, and be able to award the graduate degree at the end of it. And I spun the wheels of that for, probably three or 4 years. And I actually think that, so Wolf, our awarding institution, I think that was primarily a post-COVID thing. And what happened in COVID, I'm sure it was in the pipeline and something must have existed prior to that. But I think everybody saw what happened through the COVID thing, as we had this sudden massive boom in online education, massive boom in course creation from people, especially when people lost their jobs and things like that. And there was always a bubbling undercurrent, I think, of the world is moving to being more decentralized, to being more about the world's experts can produce their own content and access people via the internet, whatever, YouTube or paid courses, etc., etc. And I think that, Wolf, with their model, it's ultimately, if you are a educator and you have a program, they will help you make that program align with university credits so that you can award a degree. They award the degree, you are just a partner in the process ultimately. And for me, that was really easy, because I kind of approached them as like, look, I'd really like to do this. How does it work? And then I was like, this is really, really expensive. Maybe maybe I need to think this through a little bit more. And I was just a dude, right? And I'm just like, oh, this would be cool. And then I'm like, okay, this is expensive. Maybe I need to think about this. But ultimately, like, for me, it was really simple, because I'd spent so long doing that itself, in terms of designing degrees, validating programs, understanding how to put together, program specifications, and all of these boring academic stuff. And so I found the solution in probably 2021, and I once again went, okay, right, I think I've solved one part of it, but I have not solved this operationally running this as a business and being able to market this to people and being able to make this exist. Like, okay, it's all good. Like I'm confident in developing a better student experience, better content, better model, and there's a vehicle which will allow the awarding to take place. And I had those pieces in place, but then I'm like, okay,
I make money now.
Yeah. Firstly, I was basically just like, for about 2 years or so, I was like, unless I partner with somebody, this is never going to exist, because I'm never going to do this as an individual. And then kind of approached Stu, Kevin, and the guys at Altis, and I was like, are you guys keen to do this? And they were just like, that sounds sick. Yes, absolutely, let's do that. And then that's been 150 miles an hour ever since then, which has been great. But it's a really interesting one, because everybody we get who books calls to chat about the program or who comes to speak to us, everybody says really similar things, in the sense of, this is what I've been looking for, this is what I've been waiting to exist. Like, haven't done a graduate degree, or have done one in a slightly different topic, and just recognize I don't want to just go down the traditional route of doing your classic reductionist, academically driven, institutionalized program. And everybody says the same thing, and it's been great that we've suddenly found the mechanism to be able to do that, and that we can do that without that many constraints that force us into too much of a box. And it just comes with so many benefits. Like, we can iterate so much quicker, we can develop content that's just so much more effective and so much more impactful for people, and we can just basically develop a system that is much more about coach development and coach education, rather than no, this is the process you have to take students through, and they get this certificate at the end. Don't worry about the details, let's just get them from A to B, which is kind of what the traditional system constrains itself into. So man, like, it's been I think for the industry as a whole, like, a long time coming. You always heard this needs to be better. The students that come out of the university or college system aren't particularly great in a lot of cases. So it's kind of everybody's been wanting for it to happen, and I'm pleased that we have finally found a way for it to happen. And we're constantly, like I said, iterating, making improvements, because it's interesting how it is vastly better than what 98% of what is elsewhere already. But I'm still sitting there each week with with Stu and Nick, etc., and kind of just going, but this bit I'm not happy with yet. And like, can we also make this bit better? Or we need more of this and less of this. And it's just, over the next probably 12 to 18 months, I think we'll get to like a really perfect sweet spot of, okay, we've had the third group through this now. This is now in a really good place, and we're really, really happy with it. And, we'll expand the portfolio out into different programs and stuff, but nice that we can really put together something like this that is really genuinely practitioner focused. Instead of kind of trying to be, but doing it in a system that doesn't really want you to be, or doesn't like allow you to fully be, basically.
Right. Yeah. This may be, I know I'm throwing you this question kind of, and you may not have it right off the top of your head. You might. You're building this program. You said you've been in HE, and by HE, I think that means higher education, right? So
correct. Apologies.
HE,
yes.
Right? No worries. Yeah. Perfect. Right. So you've been in it, like you said. You're in it. You're delivering curriculum. You're a coach. Was there something where you're like, coaches need this and they're not getting it? So it's kind of like objective. They need these things, so we have to provide this objectively. Was there something there? First question. And then second, are there specific topics where you're like, at this level, this should be a conversation piece that they're exposed to? So even if it isn't like an absolute need, master's level strength coaches and practitioners should at least be engaging in this conversation. Were there topics that fit those two categories? Were they the same category? Like, when you're looking at curriculum development, how much of it was not being provided, they need this, plus don't need this, but really should be on like the edge of this kind of a conversation?
Yeah, great question. I think what's been missing for a really long time isn't actually information. It's not a topic. It's not knowledge. It's not information. It's not a topic. It's not content. People are surrounded by that, right? Like you can go on YouTube, you can listen to podcasts, and you could probably consume every single piece of training related information that exists in the world. Read Substack. You could find it.
Yeah.
All of that exists. And I would actually say there are lots of good programs in the traditional system that go through maybe most of those core components of that information. It exists. But the piece that is the missing component for people is everybody needs help and is a little bit lost with piecing those things together.
Yes,
and actually kind of going, oh, I heard these three things, and these are three different people saying three similar things. How do they actually synthesize, converge themselves together for there to be some core principles that are interacting and similar between all of those different perspectives? And that these are the things which actually guide what I do in my circumstance and my context, because it's not the same as what theirs is. And I think what you traditionally get is you get everything delivered very separately. You get, okay, well, the physiologist will deliver this stuff, the biomechanist will deliver this stuff, the applied S&C coach will deliver this stuff, and you get these little kind of pockets of potentially sometimes really good information, other times not. But then the student is left with, okay, I'm trying to piece these together, but actually the piecing of them together is a whole nother layer of if, buts, maybes. Oh, but there's also this principle, and then these two things. So the expertise piece, I think, is probably a great way to put it, where synthesizing stuff together, making connections, and ordering all of the information which you've got access to in a way that it actually becomes useful is the number one piece by a country mile that is missing. And then that then means it's not necessarily that a particular topic that gets missed in terms of like wanting to add into a new program like this. It's just, okay, these are some of the core content. Here's the content which bits and pieces within each domain that we think are missing. But then what has to happen is we have to provide and facilitate a process for them to actually, them being the students, to actually connect those things to a problem, and then to be able to discuss how that problem might look in real life in a particular scenario or situation. Yeah. So the content piece is actually one of the easier parts. And don't get me wrong, I'm gonna guesstimate that probably 40% or so of what we talk about, you would probably struggle to find somewhere else if it packaged in the same way. 60% is you could probably find that somewhere else, but actually we'll take that simple thing and we will do something different, new with it that allows you to have actually developed some skills in it versus going, maximum aerobic speed, cool, that's great, that's great. So it's I guess it's like the operational side of his content, but we need to have a couple of different layers of what we do with that. Take it, connect it. Once you've connected it and made a little bit of sense, apply it to a problem more directly. Once you've applied it to a static problem, okay, now you've got a real life problem where you have your own constraints and you have your own context, and then now let's kind of apply it to that. So we kind of try really hard to have that life cycle instead of content, tell me something about it or tell me you understand it, thanks very much, move yourself along. Like there's so much more to it that, and it's those pieces which are missing when someone then, goes into a role, or they graduate and they go somewhere and they go, oh, all of a sudden my head's just spinning with a load of different things. This person says this, Dennis told me this, and someone else told me this, and someone else told me this. And then you just like decision paralysis of what's your philosophy, what's your process that you're going to go through, how do you identify what matters here, and how do you develop as a practitioner versus learn some stuff.
Yeah. I always think about this Daniel Pink statement, and I'm sure you've heard it before if you haven't. He said 30 years ago, and it's crazy to say 30 years ago, it was like 30 years ago when you sought out an expert, you sought out somebody that had access to knowledge that you wouldn't have, because at that point in time, access to knowledge was not readily available. So like if you went to a dam path, dude with years of coaching track at the highest level, whoever taught him, whoever his mentor was, like the information legitimately was what separated an expert from somebody that was learning. Clearly, that's not the case anymore. He said now an expert is the person that can synthesize all of the information that's available. And I would actually take it a step further, because he made that comment 6 years ago, which was like right at the beginning of COVID. And I would venture to say now the expert is the person, like you said, that can now have the information, synthesize it, and then apply it into the context that is presented to them. Like there's this other level of the expert isn't the information, it's the application of that information to the specific context that is presented to them that can change tomorrow with a completely different person. So like you said, the decision filters, the application piece is what's missing. And that's really hard to teach people to do, which is where I think, and just really quickly, which is why, like I said, I think that's why people are like, this is what's missing from what we're doing, from everything else that we could take, that I think you guys do clearly at the highest level, is you take people on this journey of how to now not just look at the information, but understand, not just understand it, but connect it and apply it, which is not something that I think many people are doing.
Yeah, we talk a lot about a couple of different things. One being like learn to zoom in and zoom back out. Mm-hmm. Remember big picture, think kind of very holistically and the whole kind of systems view. And at some point also learn to zoom in and go towards things. That's one thing which people from the application really applying things to problems piece struggle with, because they go, I've had ankle stiffness, it's really important. And zoom in at the ankle. It's like, okay, but you're looking at this one tiny individual part, and actually that thing is connected to 50 other things. And if you just zoom out, look what the center of mass is doing, maybe don't worry too much about the ankle just yet. Let's think bigger picture first. So there's things like that, which like, okay, zoom in, zoom out, and just constantly check yourself. And then there's other things when it's, okay, like, you know, we look at, we do like a task, which is really key, which I call like a technical model hierarchy. So you can take sprinting or something like that. And there's so many different models, or so many different, we can say models, frameworks, or things that people use to describe sprinting, i.e. this piece is important. You can look at Franz Bosch's attractor-based model. There's 5 non-negotiables that artists talk about. Speedworks talk about projection, reactivity, and switching. There's then front side and back side mechanics. You can then split it into a kilogram with these, 4 or 5 positions. And then now there's the patterns that, Stu and the artist guys talk about. And you're like, okay, cool. So all of this stuff is about this one movement action. Right. And then we kind of go, okay, so like the technical model hierarchy for me is like, okay, some of these things are really zoomed out, big picture things that you almost like worry about first. Some of them are capacity based, some of them are more coordination based, and then you slowly filter into, and then eventually there's something like swing leg retraction. When it's like, all right, you're starting to get into kind of the nitty gritty of things a little bit, and that starts to zoom in. There's a rationale towards direction of ground reaction force and all of these things. Okay, but there was also these other 3-4 layers of stuff that come above that. And that zoom in, zoom out, and take everything that you might know about something, and not only think about how it all connects from a systems perspective, but also think about what is kind of more higher up the hierarchy, and from a triage perspective should come first versus what should come second. And that is probably the most crucial thought process and cognitive skill that we kind of really facilitate people trying to get better at, because if not, you just get distracted. You start looking at something that's just maybe at the wrong level to what you really need to be looking at, and then you can attempt to convince yourself that you've created this really impactful change when actually, okay, you've done a tiny thing in a big thing. And has that made the boat go faster, for want of a better, for that classic term?
Yeah. I'm curious what your thought is. Pendulums swinging, as they usually do in all of these industries, where I think there was a point in time where zooming in and getting into like the closest possible view of this that you could have was probably the trajectory that our industry was going in, where to reductionist as a word that you used earlier. Whereas I think there's a bit of a swing out of that. Your concept, I think, which is very Alex's for sure, of like zoom out, zoom in, and having that ability to move in and out, I think is specific and special to you guys. But even I feel like I'm starting to hear a bit more of the I think we've gotten too granular in the way that we're looking at this. Maybe it is a bit broader in our development that we should be looking at. Like maybe we've gone too far. Is that true in the sort of general approach you see in our industry, or am I just kind of talking out of my butt here a bit?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely not. Yeah, I think in a short answer, yes. I don't like to maybe discount any of that, because zooming is really important, and we definitely have made a little bit of a swing. And I think this is, and I think that, like, you think the classic, I think this is an old Mike Boyle thing when you think about like the evolution of a strength coach, right? And you kind of go through like the bodybuilding component, and then you become a power lifter, and then you become a weightlifter, and then and basically we've been through like these big, almost like decade based phases of different things dominating. And there's been other like little maybe like side streams, like some functional stuff, some stuff that's a little bit left field at times. But I think we kind of went, loads of Olympic weightlifting, maybe like 90s, early 2000s. Then we became much more track and field focused, as track and field people became more prominent in influencing performance coaches and the way they might see things. And I think with that came, now I'm really thinking about movement instead of just output. And then that then became zooming in. And we even find it with our student groups right now. And it's funny because like, you do something like, you mention the foot and ankle, and it's like, tell me more about the foot and ankle. Tell me more. And you just like, how does the midfoot? And it's like, okay, people find it exciting, find it really sexy, and they feel like there's impact there, of which there is. And yes, that stuff is really important. So I don't necessarily think it's maybe a swing in such that we swung to an end when it's like none of this stuff matters. And by no means am I suggesting that's what you were suggesting either. But I think we've swung because we've kind of just, we've kind of come out of a phase of kinetic output all the time and just raw strength numbers, and we've gone into much more of a really movement dominant phase influenced by the track and field community. And naturally what I think will happen is, it's not so much we'll swing away from that, but then we'll take that new stuff that people have got excited about and spent time on, and we'll start to move towards something else, and the philosophy will just continue to evolve, and what is trendy will continue to evolve. We've seen that recently, like deceleration stuff, right? Suddenly we're starting to get research on it, and then now all of a sudden every fifth thing you see people talk about is braking and deceleration, and that will naturally happen. Ecological dynamics and the agility stuff is starting to take a little bit more of an attention and prominence now, and I think everything is useful. I don't really believe in discarding or discounting anything. It's useful, but it can't entirely take over your philosophy so much that you forget about everything that surrounds it. And whatever new information or new perspective you take on should adapt into a bigger systems wide view instead of it becoming, like a go-to practitioner talking about something just anyway. You know what I mean. Things that just maybe miss the bigger picture sometimes.
With that in mind, just to come back to putting together this curriculum, were there things where you're like, nope, not gonna get, like you said, you guys meet weekly and you're like, I want to develop that more, and maybe this didn't go the way that I thought it would. Were there some like key bedrock things where you're like, but this is what the center of the program is about, so that we know that we're always kind of filling and fitting into this greater theme? So like, if somebody that has never heard of the program, is there like a philosophically, this is what we're trying to develop, and then within that we're going to pull these levers?
I kind of want to answer that in two ways. In short, yes, the things that we do that are, or the way that we talk about performance and coaching, which is unique to everybody else, is we talk about a systems view of things, not just the athlete themselves, but also the organization that you work in, you and the environment that you coach in. So we talk about a systems view of things, which is primarily about how things interconnect and how the sum of the parts are greater than the whole, whatever that classic thing is. So the systems view component of it, but also the fact that we just take much more of a knowledge organization component to it. And I think that's probably the simplest way that I would maybe describe it. Like, that's where we think and talk about systems. We talk about an organization of your knowledge to make that knowledge really impactful. And then I'd maybe add a third piece about I can't remember. I had one more piece. I'd maybe had what was it? It was on the tip of my tongue just 2 seconds ago. Anyway, it'll pop back into my head in just a second. So I think it's like that systems-wide component is practically influences every single thing that we do. But then the other way that my brain wanted to answer that question was, we constantly are kind of reflecting and reviewing the way that we feel about different parts of the program, what we've emphasized, what we've maybe had biases on, or what we've missed. And it's always interesting where, okay, we generally come from a bias of track and field and team sports. Yeah. And I think that's a fair way, a very fair and honest way to describe it. So we kind of go, and students will ask questions and they'll come with tasks. We ask everybody to do loads of tasks. And it's like, I've done this task, but I've applied it to rock climbing. And you suddenly go, okay, cool. So like, I didn't think about that when we were putting these tasks together. And then you suddenly start going, actually, this model that we have, or this task that we've asked for, is missing or needs something taken away to make it more transferable. So then our tasks and our models evolve, and we are constantly wrestling with locomotion is a foundational thing that is the most transferable across a ton of different sports and a ton of different areas. But there are also loads of components or areas that are performance related in different sports that's non-locomotive, that's either just a discrete skill. Weightlifting obviously is a great example of that, at least in weightlifting as a sport. But then there's still these other just discrete skills that are not cyclical and they're not locomotive based. And it's like, okay, let's just constantly go back and cross check, have the models that we are talking about in terms of organization, in terms of tasks to, facilitate the knowledge transfer of things. Are they useful across the breadth of tasks that we want them to be useful with or useful on? And that is always a really interesting conversation, because you suddenly just start going, jiu-jitsu, rock climbing, paddle sports like canoeing and things like that, and then endurance sports, another one. We're like, we probably just want to maybe double down on those components, or not double down, but increase the exposure to some of those other things that we are kind of planning on talking about. And that's been, I've really enjoyed that. I come from a multi-sport background. I'm not a track and field person. I definitely have a team sport bias, but that's been something that's also been really interesting in it, where we just go systems thinking and the ability to connect things and organize knowledge that is applicable to any sport and every activity you can possibly think of. So we have to continually review our models to make sure, are we being applicable to every sport and every activity?
Dude, I think it's such a critical point to make, because as you were talking about it, I think my jiu-jitsu background, and I remember when I started, because I played team sports my entire life. Jiu-jitsu was the first time where it was like, okay, we need you to be really good, but like on your back. And I remembered just like thinking, okay, how do I apply everything that I've learned, which was about how to get from point A to point B, like through space, interacting with the ground, and all these things, to now this. And how do I make it, in my own understanding, where the language is still the same? So it's not like go learn a new language, because everything, it's not that. It's just how we kind of apply the language in the best possible way to cover every potential output that the human body can do. And it's not all locomotive. So how do we get there? And I remember that's where it was like, okay, how do I start to connect things? And I don't know if they're correct, but the process of connecting things so that they make sense has to happen for me. You know what I mean? So that when I'm put in this scenario with this person, the process at the very least still applies, even if the components are different, because that's what we're really looking for, I think, as practitioners at the end of the day, right? And so, like, for me, it was going down the rabbit hole of I'm not going to be too concerned about being right, but I need to be concerned about whether the process is transferable in my thinking, so that I can start to deconstruct this in a consistent way. And that is really hard to do, but in my feeling, like, is the point of what we should be able to do. And so the fact that, like, that's the way that you all are approaching it, again, continues to just, like, reinforce my bias that y'all are the best anyway. But, like, finally discussing, like, the true skill that a coach should possess, in my opinion, and that is, like, the apex skill. And the fact that you guys are figuring out a way to develop that in other coaches is, to me, like, true higher education in our industry, because that's the trick to it. Yeah, okay, great. Well, I work with rock climbers. Then it should be, fuck, sorry, yeah, like, this probably isn't going to work for you. Like, no, the process of figuring this out is what this is about, not necessarily about all the models that we could talk about, because all the models are the same in some way, shape, or form. when we really break it down, you know what I mean? At least in my estimation. If we really
totally.
So.
Yeah, and that reminds me, that was my third thing when you were talking about, kind of the artist perspective, like the first principles side of it.
Yeah.
Systems thinking, connect things, order your knowledge, and have this kind of hierarchy of kind of where your attention goes, but ultimately understand the first principles of what it is that you're actually trying to achieve and what it is that you're trying to make happen. And again, it's like the transferable component in terms of into a lot of those different sports, I don't necessarily think is always maybe like a biomechanical, physiological-esque problem. It's more of just like a context problem. What is performance here? What is success defined by? What are your KPIs? What are you trying to influence as a performance, physical focused practitioner? And then that is, if you get that bit done really, really well, and those questions are exactly the same for every single sport and activity. I say that thinking I cross-reference that in the future. That's the same for all sports and activities. Okay, well then the kinematic, kinetic, physiological, whatever, neuromuscular components, that should be pretty easy from that point in time, because you should have asked those big picture questions that should guide every decision you make and every question you ask much earlier. And it's interesting where that even at like the team sport level doesn't happen that often. In the sense that, okay, what's your goal? Well, my goal is to get them faster. Okay, why how will that have an impact on this game? It's okay, well, I'll score more. Okay, we need to fill those gaps in, right? And and it's how does any kind of ability have an impact to something technical, tactical? How does that thing that they have any impact on gameplay and have any impact on performance outcome? And I think that's kind of then the process of, okay, so what is success in rock climbing, as an example? What are the constraints that are primarily at play that are going to be new? How are you eventually getting to a method? And we all get obsessed with a method, or somehow training looks, but it's like, no, there's all of your attention should actually be elsewhere, because you can pick and choose which method you want. There's probably 10 of them, that all of which may or may not be suitable. Don't overthink it. Ask the right questions prior to that stage. And that is the really tricky bit, and that's the really important bit. And that's also the bit that, again, like the traditional education system doesn't really do, because it's kind of going biomechanics, we're zooming in here and we're talking about methods. And it's like, okay, but I work in this environment. Where should my attention be? Which is a really fun problem. I also add that it's really challenging, but I love the fact that we get to have the conversations, which are, someone asked me a question, I'm like, I don't really know anything about that particular sport, but I would probably be asking these questions. Can you tell me about those what you think the answers are to these questions, and then we can maybe work this out, and let's see if there's a solution to come up with. Our students almost come up with brand new models most of the time, in the sense of, oh, look, I've applied this to slalom canoeing, and you're like, okay, sweet, cool, let's see what this looks like. I don't know anything about slalom canoeing, but let's see if this has been as transferable and as potentially impactful as possible, and it's always really fun.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Like, while you were telling that, I remembered having this conversation when I was in Ireland and working for the rugby. And I don't know how much you know about rugby, but either way, the outside guys that play on the sides, the wingers, the backs, are the fast guys, right? And the usual strategy is like, let's get it to them, and they're fast, and they'll run, and they'll go. And our particular strategy was we would kick the ball high up in the air. Like, you can kick the ball down the field, and you would want to win the ball in the air. And I remember having a conversation with a coach, and I was like, the guys on the sides, they're fast, but they're the smallest people on our team. And we're playing this kicking game. So, like, should we not change the guys on the outside? Maybe put tall people in there to be able to win the ball in the air? And I remembered, like, asking the question and, like, seeing things break because the right question was asked, but the wrong answer had been so applied for so long based on the culture of the sport that, like, anything that we do from this point, we're not answering the right question tactically, and all of it fits. And I think the point that I wanted to make in that story was the system-wide approach that you're talking about is not just about the human. Like you said, it's about how all of these pieces connect, and can we ask the correct questions of the system? Because only when we ask the correct questions of the system, context, all of it, can we really start to create the right answers, as opposed to from the bottom up, which is what I think we've been taught for so long. Like, no pun intended. We've taught that strength and conditioning is about what happens from the ground up. And it's not necessarily always that way.
Yeah, totally. I think and this is the other piece that comes into this, is I say this because I'm about to make a sweeping statement, which is only applicable to certain people in certain roles. So you then go, if you work in team sport, so you work in a sport, i.e. I work, so let's say my most recent work, 3x3 basketball, been super interesting, brand new sport we don't know much about, you have to problem solve, right? Yep. So there are things where I'm like, okay, you know what? This should be the first kind of questions you should ask. And this is where more of your attention should go as an S&C coach. For example, how do you actually win the game? What are the technical, tactical KPIs? Which one of those KPIs are the most physically influenced? Therefore, how do you physically influence them? Blah, 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 blah. But that's only relevant for if you're an S&C coach who works in a sport, versus if you own a private facility, or you have private practice, or you primarily deal with return to play. Okay, well, actually, no, I can't make a sweeping statement of more of your attention should go here, because no, you have a completely different working ecosystem, and your impact is now aligned to X and Y things, instead of impact in this other environment being aligned to this other one. Like, I'm a really big proponent, with kind of like my change direction agility stuff, where the weight room's pretty easy, strength training is not that complicated, and actually more of our attention should be, let's say you're an S&C, a performance coach that goes into a new sport environment. You should spend a lot more time, how do I make positive impacts while they are training, versus wait until you're done, we'll go into the gym after that, and then I'll see you in an hour. Like, do you understand what load that training comes with? Do you understand how the movements can be influenced or adapted while they're doing some technical things, but from a physical perspective? And maybe a lot of these, what I would maybe say, more performance coaching questions versus strength coaching questions. But that's something that I'm really passionate about and that I think about a lot, but that's just not relevant if you work in a private facility. So then you kind of go, all right, so they're different kind of questions, and you have to put people's attention in the right place, but it still starts with, where do you work? What are your operational outcomes? What are your KPIs? What are you trying to achieve? Then you've got an athlete level, and there's just all of these different levels of questions before you even get to, should my knees go over my toes in a back squat, or whatever, some of the things which we like to zoom our attention into a little bit.
You were starting to touch on it there, and I wanted to get there because in the little, it's funny. I feel like I've known you for so much longer than I know you, and I feel like I've seen you so many more times than I have. But change of direction seems to be, like you said, you just said you're passionate about it, and it's crucial. We're talking about systems. What is your philosophy on developing change of direction?
I'll just start with a big question, mate. I definitely can't elevate a pitch that in terms of what my philosophy is, because it is a constantly evolving process.
Beautiful. For sure.
I can probably say what my philosophy isn't.
Okay. Better.
It's easy to kind of say the things that I've moved away from, which I no longer really pay a massive amount of attention to. I'm not a massive technical model guy, in the sense that the traditional way of teaching them, or the traditional way of viewing change of direction agility, is the same way we viewed strength training. A deadlift looks like this, a squat looks like this, a bench press looks like this, and I will teach people these three movements. And that is a thought process, which is a very linear, very closed exposure thought process. And then that's evolved into, okay, well, also sprinting looks like this. Therefore, that's what, that's how we would teach something field-based. And we've kind of then moved from the sprinting stuff, weight room, to sprinting. And we've then kind of gone to the change of direction, and I would put deceleration in this box as well. And I think we've had that evolution when we talk about those earlier pendulum swings, without ever kind of going, but I'm applying the same thought process and the same organization of information approach to this completely different thing, which works at one end of this continuum, but actually, in my opinion, doesn't work as well at the other end. It does to an extent, of course, but instead of it being maybe, this is a crossover step, this is a drop step, this is a deceleration to a base position, this is a deceleration to a split stance, and maybe having these pockets of, this is a cut, this is a curve. Those are useful because they provide anchors, and they provide like movement control anchors. And I think that that's a really useful way to organize your kind of training and your coaching. But for me, I kind of have a one step zoom out, and I go, each one of those things are different points on like a continuum and on an exposure landscape. And I think it's less appropriate to just have I'm going to teach them to do the crossover step, and it will look like this, and then that will then impact all of these other things. And it becomes more about, okay, actually in a crossover step, I'm not teaching it as an exercise, I am teaching core movement skills within that. So, okay, you need to be able to dissociate your pelvis and your torso. You need to be able to apply force laterally instead of only linearly. You need to, when you break and you kind of land in that initial braking step, if you go like a crossover to base as a traditional movement, when you kind of land, and you need to be able to dissipate force by triple flexing through ankle, knee, and hip. So my kind of way of organizing information in my head is, there are a range of different movement skills which are applied in multiple different planes at multiple different speeds and multiple different scenarios. And that interconnects between all of these different, maybe individual bucketed skills like crossover step, drop step, and things like that. So my attention goes to, okay, I want you to teach you these underpinning skills that connect things, not to get you good at an exercise execution of something. And I guess maybe that's my non-concise way of describing that philosophically, because then I kind of just go to, okay, take something like pelvis torso dissociation. That's important in a crossover step, at least in like a defensive kind of styly motion. That's important in running based actions where there's any element of challenge in terms of vision and gaze and having to look over shoulders, look over left and right. It's important to an extent, at least in the lateral kind of plane, in like a cutting change of direction-esque action with the pelvic gimbal and things like that. So then my attention kind of goes to, all right, I'm not necessarily going to think about teach you to be able to do this step or this action. I'm going to give you a bunch of different stuff that's going to challenge you to control your pelvis independently to controlling your torso. And it makes things look a load messier, and it makes things, adds loads more variability and stuff to it. but I kind of see that as that is the anchor point that connects everything here. And I prefer to look at it that way in comparison to, oh, if I teach these 4 patterns, the patterns will allow the evolution of movement to naturally happen, which is kind of why my, some of my practice at least becomes a little bit more ecological, constraints based, as much as that's a dangerous slope in terms of extremity. Yeah, but that's not a concise answer, so I apologize if you or anybody's listening thinking, like, I just think it's a philosophy change from, we look at the weight room one way and it works really well, but let's not just copy paste that thought process to the way that we look at multi-directional, in action, contextual change direction actions. It's useful, but let's also think, I'm going to step back and I'm going to think, should I just approach this completely differently with a different thought process and a different, cognitive.
I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, right? And feel free to be like, I don't think so. And I'm right on with you with, we'll use the term closed. Closed for the weight room, for sure. Closed actions. I think you could try to add in something, but probably not going to happen to a great degree. And I would argue closed linearly as well. Even if there is like an open component, like it's not really going to impact dramatically how that expression is going to happen. Change of direction is a whole different beast. It only exists, in my opinion, and I use the word only. I like making these sweeping sort of statements that I can be criticized for later. That's fine.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, it only exists in an open environment. Like the only true expression of like change of direction, multi-directional movement skill is what it looks like in an open environment, not what it looks like in a closed environment. So what I'm reading and what you're saying is the approaches that we've taken to the weight room and the linear, and we follow this, just kind of don't fit over here. It seems to make sense because so much of the expression is so dependent upon it being in an open environment where it almost has to predominantly exist in its development there than in this other place where, whether it's open or closed, doesn't really determine the expression of that movement to a degree, at least like through shapes and mechanics, but everything changes. Everything, distance, where that person is, how much you're going to have to, like, all of that has so much of an influence that for that to just kind of be a bit of a footnote in our application as opposed to like the center of how we start to develop it, maybe seems like we're missing a key element to what this thing is to begin with. And so having to make that shift, what is this? And so once we ask that question, what this is, then knowing, like, I feel like we cannot approach change of direction the same way because what makes it what it is completely different. And that's just, if I'm reading what you're saying, I feel like that's where the shift in change of direction training needs to go.
Yeah, ish. Like, in principle, I agree. I think you and I have probably got really similar broad philosophies on this, and it's interesting. It's a great conversation because we've never properly really talked about it. On one hand, I could listen to that statement, I could go, yeah, completely agree. Yeah. But what I think happens is, like, let's say that aligns with more of an ecological view of an athlete self-organizes their movement to the constraints of the task, and all of those kind of viewpoints, which are becoming more and more popular, of which I completely understand and completely agree with. And I've just explained my philosophy leaning towards that direction. Mm-hmm. More so maybe than the other end of that continuum of rehearsing pre-planned things. But I just think it's both. And I think this is what this is just what we just do really badly, is that we have maybe the ecological dynamics extremists who are maybe kind of going, oh, no, everything is an interaction between the constraints of the situation and the athlete's perception of affordances, and then they choose a solution and they self-organize and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, that's great, but athletes self-organize based upon their own individual constraints. one of their individual constraints, along with many other things, is do they have an element of patterns, coordination, movement control? What coordination? What do they call them? So like muscle synergies would be like the EMG zoomed in way of talking about muscles that work together in terms of across joints and interjoints. And then coordinative structures, that's the word that I'm looking for. So again, like the ecological research would talk about, but there's these coordinative structures when, you know, a group of muscles work together across a pattern to produce a movement. And I was like, okay, but an athlete is going to self-organize into a situation, but if they're intrinsic patterning, exposure, confidence level, capacity development history, injury history makes them want to do it. I do the thing, not about select or I identify the affordance for something, but to then actually express the movement. If there are individual constraints, make that movement expression shit. Then we need to, at some point, we probably go, okay, I think that we can maybe just redistribute our attention and put more attention and more focus on them developing these things, which might be whole body coordination, perceptual feedback from the proprioceptive system, or strength at certain ranges of motion, or the ability to apply force laterally, or whatever that might be. There's 100 of them. That is still a viable training approach to try and change the athlete's constraints that they are bringing. Therefore, when they then go into those dynamic situations, they are bringing different things to the party, which allow them to solve problems differently. So I really don't subscribe to, as much as somebody who thinks quite ecologically, and as somebody who likes that side of things, I do lots of reactive stuff. I don't subscribe to, but the movement is just different if it is done reactively and in a dynamic situation. It's like, yeah, it's different, but it's maybe different by 20%, something like that. And it's like, so let's not maybe then say that I can't then make a really substantial impact on the 80% of that movement that will actually be the same, in terms of, are they confident to be able to approach a change of direction with high velocity, rapidly drop their center of mass, slam the brakes on, deal with those forces and feel that proprioceptive and vestibular feedback, and then still be in control over their bodies and their neurological system is happy. I feel like I can get them good at that without having to maybe have this 2 versus 1 highly representative attacker defender scenario. I will still do that because it's an important part of the puzzle, and it does change the movement because anticipation starts to change and postural positions begin to adapt a little bit. But I also think that 80% of it is probably the same and able to be influenced from the pre-planned stuff. And I'm a real moderate with that side of things, and it's interesting because I look at the traditional biomechanical stuff. Now let's take ACL injuries as an example. You look at the traditional biomechanical stuff and you go, okay, another 3D motion capture study that's telling me that the injury mechanism is femoral internal rotation and ipsilateral trunk lean and blah, 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 blah. Great. But I don't feel like that's particularly impactful because that is just way too removed, and it's not considering constraints well enough, and it's not systems-wide holistic enough. But at the same time, watching some of the highly representative, somewhat extreme positions over everything has to be visual perception and action and decision making, because that's what Gibson said, the way that vision works with let's stop discounting both of these ends of the spectrum, and let's maybe think from a practitioner's perspective, pragmatically, it's a bit of both of these. Do I have a model that can take me up towards the more reactive, more dynamic perception action training exposure? And do I have a level of understanding and a model that can take me maybe zooming in biomechanically to actually what's happening at the foot, the knee, how is that being dynamically controlled, et cetera, et cetera. So that puts me in kind of this middle position where actually both ends of the spectrum probably disagree because they think it's more binary than that. But I think that's about being a practitioner and synthesizing together loads of different models and frameworks to come up with something that feels right, instead of aligning with one singular thing.
Sounds like your philosophy right there, dude.
Yeah, and there we go. Was that an elevator pitch?
That was dude. That was it. You know, it's funny. So I am not as well versed in ecological dynamics as I would like to be, and I feel like it's one of the things that probably in having a number of different conversations I should be more educated on. However, the simple sort of caveman brain in that I have a tendency to work with is I love that we talk about people will self-select, but they've got to have stuff to select from. So how about we give them as many possible things to select from? Then yeah, I can't tell you to do this or that in this situation. You choose that, but I can tell you if you have the ability to choose both of these things, you're probably better off, right? So I feel like the way that I've always seen this is like, yeah, I agree with you. I can't tell you do a shuffle step or do a crossover step in this scenario. I don't know. You choose. But you should be able to do both. I feel pretty comfortable. And so that's what I'll focus on doing. And then take some time putting you in the scenarios where you use both and you figure out which one you like. But it's a completely different thing if you can't do this physically, like you said. So how about that's what I do? How about I just give you the biggest toolbox possible and then let you choose the tool that you want? Is the way that I've always seen like my role in this whole equation is not to tell you what to do. It's to give you as many options as possible. I feel like that's the my philosophy at the end of the day.
Yeah. I would subscribe to that same description, right? Like, and I think again, that doesn't necessarily mean that our practice would look exactly the same, but it is. I'm looking at this and I'm going, all right, my session today is going to be focused on triple flexion coordination or pelvic torso dissociation. That's the way I might have a theme in a particular session, and then I've got a bunch of different things that will challenge the athlete to get good at those different skills, and that is me giving the athlete an ability to perceive what is going on in their body, to think, oh, actually I can control this better. Well, actually, yeah, you know what, I don't feel as confident on my right side as what I do on my left side, so let's try and work on that. And then that then helps them, and then I would then be like, okay, you've got better at this, now let's blend this into more perceptive action stuff. But it still links in terms of what practice looks like. It still comes back to the context stuff that we mentioned earlier, in the sense that if you work in a sport and or you work with technical coaches who do a lot of small-sided, maybe one-on-one technical physical things without necessarily knowing it, i.e. they are providing the athlete good opportunity for problem solving, perception, action, integration, and that kind of more holistic challenge. Some coaches will do lots of that. Others will do absolutely barely any. Some sports will naturally give an athlete loads of opportunities to do that. Others probably won't give it any option. And it's, you identify, rugby is a great example. Firstly, I'm disappointed you think I knew nothing about rugby as a British man.
Oh no, I didn't. I just don't like.
No, you're good. But like rugby is a great example where you have the big holistic thing, i.e. the coaches out there, they got, however many people out on a training group. There's 23 guys out there. And then they're going, they might be for 80% of their time focusing on how this whole group interact. So they're not really worrying about whether your winger or your fullback has got really great decision-making, perception, action component in certain situations. But then you might have these sessions when the units get together, and then all of a sudden maybe those sessions do look like that. So if you're in an environment when it does look like that because of the coaches or the sport, then actually as the S&C, you don't necessarily need to be like, oh well, I'm going to do loads of perceptually rich reactive change of direction because I kind of get in that. So maybe your time is best spent here, but vice versa, the exact opposite of that can be relevant, where, I don't know, let's take football, soccer for you and the American listeners. You take football, where again, big group of people out there. I would maybe say I think that's less done in soccer in terms of zooming down to the more individual 1 versus 2 versus 1 dynamic, because it's a little bit more whole front line, midline, back line kind of dynamic based. So the coach is worrying about the whole thing, And is there anybody worrying about the lower levels? So maybe in soccer, you actually would, as an S&C coach, spend more time thinking about that perception action because you feel like that's missing and you can have impact there. So I think you can have a philosophy about what you think becomes important for performance to look good and for performance to perform well, to be efficient and effective. But then you go into an environment, or you have a certain working context, and then that should determine whether you should do any of those things. Because it might be that, like, I think perception action is really important. It's okay, but you're just doubling up on the stuff that they've already got.
Right.
But in another environment, you do need to do more of that. And it's so important to have that conversation before you worry about exactly what methods you should spend your time on, because that's how you just get bad fit. And an S&C who's maybe missing the bigger picture of that's not a great use of your time. You get to spend X amount of time with them, and what is the most highest impact things you can do with them. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's another, and it all depends on all of these other things that are around. But it's it's interesting when you kind of see the slightly more extreme line preaching of this should happen or that should happen. And it's like, well, it depends. It's always a little bit of everything. I think training distribution is a much bigger question that doesn't get talked about as much.
Yeah. I think that is 100% spot on. I think there are fixed ideas of what people's roles are and they stay there, and as opposed to, again, looking at the whole thing and realizing, okay, this is where we'll get the most out of what I should be doing, as opposed to this is who I am and this is what I do. Yeah, I absolutely think that's a huge piece.
I think that, like, the one little piece that I'll just add to that is that's again where you hear broader coach philosophies, in the sense of some S&C coaches do still have the philosophy of my job's to get them strong and to get them fast. And it's like, okay, like that is relevant and is perfectly suitable for certain sports and certain environments. That's not suitable for all other ones. So you can listen, you should hear somebody maybe state things like that, and you can't just, oh, that's a cool philosophy, pick, replace, I'll have that one, thanks very much, because everybody's situation is unique. I was talking about that with one of our other tutors, has worked in more cycling and swimming, and it's like, it's easier in those sports to be like, if I get somebody really strong and I get somebody really explosive, I've done a really high proportion of my job. But then it's like, okay, but if you then go into a team sport, the football coaches or the rugby coaches, they aren't teaching them how to run and change direction. So actually, if you only have that philosophy and you miss this extra step, now all of a sudden you're probably a lot less effective. So just context, understand where you work, understand what's going on, where can you have impact, what are the KPI, and that stuff is just never ever spoken about, because we like to have hardline, cool, Instagrammable, this is my philosophy, this is right, this is wrong, and it doesn't work like that.
Brian Mann, I love it. Brian Mann's statement is strength is king, but not all sports are a monarchy. Is his way of essentially saying that exact same thing. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Like, oh yeah, strength is king, but not all sports are monarchy. So let's be a bit more, let's think about this a bit more, as opposed to just get him in there and get him strong. That works in some sports, but not all. So spot on. I love it. You're someone that's not only in higher education, but you've essentially authored, I know not exclusively, an MSc program. When you wake up in the morning, dude, like, what topic, whatever it is, like, excites you, where like this I'm like really excited about? And it doesn't have to be attached to the MSc program. It might not be. It may be in the future. Who knows? But like, you clearly have so much background and knowledge. Like, what is exciting to you to learn about, think about, whatever?
I've thought about this a lot recently. You naturally have periods of introspection and self-reflection, and what I think just describes everything is, I just like solving problems. And I don't think I can probably need to add a massive amount to that, because I just go, the master's program was born from, I've identified a problem. What currently exists in education isn't that great, and there are reasons why there are barriers to making it better. How do I solve that problem? And that became a long life's work kind of process to trying to find a way to solve that. The reason I got into the change, reduction, agility space was exactly the same. It was, as a practitioner, developing thinking, nobody's been able to explain this to me in a way that my brain settles with and go, that's really clear, and I think that answers what I want it to answer. It was always interesting. This person says this person says this person says this. I can see there's a problem here because nobody aligns. There's no good, not as much good education on that as other topics. Maybe that's something that I'll spend more time on, and that's where that passion developed. And I think that, and again, you kind of, in terms of a lot of the education philosophy with the artist MSc program is about making sense of things to solve problems. So what I get to do is create models and frameworks and education approaches to help other people make sense of things to solve problems, which itself is a problem. So I kind of just like, I'm constantly just like, anytime something comes along, which I'm like, I don't think that that's really very clear, or I don't think that's really particularly effective, like my brain just starts going, and that's just the way that it works. Love a game of golf. Why? Because the golf swing is just a cool problem, and there's just so many bits where you're like, let me try and work this out. I'm sure I can get this right at the end, and it's really just about that for me.
You're 2 years in now to the MSc program, and I'm sure, when I say 2 years in, that's like from launch. Like, we're starting to launch this thing, so there was a whole lot of work done before that. So your identification of this problem, like you said, 2017 is where you started thinking about this, and now you're at a place where, even though you're still in the process of solving it, you're at least tackling this one for the most part. Is there one that you kind of see on the horizon where you're like, ooh, I think what is the next problem that you're kind of like, I think this is what I'm going to tackle next? It's starting to tickle me a bit.
Yeah, I don't think so, purely because the current MSc educational problem is so big. I could have another decade just constantly tinkering with things. I definitely always have really broad interests. I used to do a lot more kind of individual change of direction based education than what I do now, because my attention's gone purely into the master's program. So that's something I'll probably, at some point when things settle, I'll come back to. But to be honest, it's the graduate degree revolution, as we would call it, is such a big, huge potential for impact process that takes up all of my attention until I think I need a change of mental focus. Here's something else cool that I'll work on. And really the evolution will become, right now we've really focused on a master's in strength conditioning and coaching. We're slowly getting to a point now, and actually I think, like, after having a few groups through, I think we're going to get to a really, really lovely sweet spot with it, and we'll evolve that portfolio out. We'll probably move towards like a performance therapy-esque option, a more sport and exercise science focused option, maybe like an MA in coaching or something like that. And all of those will become new problems and new things to add on, some fun things to solve that are potentially really, really impactful for people. And that's what will continue to motivate me to do that. And then maybe I'll have some side projects, because I have to my brain won't switch off, but it might get need a distraction with something else.
All right, dude, so here's the one canned question that I ask everybody, and I didn't prepare you for it, which is good. It's not crazy. It doesn't have to be a book. So it's not like give me your top 10 book list. It's not that. And it also doesn't have to be one recently. I'm just thinking 3 resources: podcast somebody should listen to, a book maybe somebody should read, an article. 3, and it could be just, man, my favorite, like for me, the 4-Hour Work Week kind of changed my life. That's like one book out of left field, but just this idea of like designing your life and taking control of it is something that like impacted me. So like something like that. If there are 3 where you're like, I think you should check this out, what would they be?
I won't try and be too changing of the world, and I'll go with what first comes to my
please.
head. Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah, there we go.
What a book, man.
Yeah.
What a book. Exceptional. If no one's ever read that, Audible, whatever. 2, read, this is a collective, every book that Seth Godin has ever written.
Yes, let's go.
That is just, I mean, even just now, I think I'm listening to, this is Strategy. And I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, why have I not found this 10 years ago? Loads of stuff about systems thinking, loads of stuff about strategy. And I'm like, this is a hell of a book. Definitely those 2. And then I'm going to say it's probably a little bit less detailed, but I am going to say anything that is personal branding focused. Yeah. Just simply because I just think that's the way the world will evolve. It'll become more decentralized. It will become more about individuals, and people will want to learn from an individual, and they'll want to, in organizations will want to employ somebody that they can find out as much about them on the internet as possible, and that they will help their marketing, blah, 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 blah. And I think that an understanding of personal branding, how to go about having a bit of a life strategy around that, to eventually have, because the other thing, everybody eventually gets to a point when they want autonomy and control and their own thing, right? And you probably need to have done some foundational things prior to that. So that's more broad, because actually there's loads of different ways that you could, and resources that you could go about finding that. But yeah, learn and just think about personal branding, about who you are, what your intersection of things are. Atomic Habits by James Clear, and every book that Seth Godin has ever written. That's my impacts.
Dude, I love that you, well, clearly you saw me throw my hands up in the air and like victory. So I talk about the coaching life cycle, and I say everybody does. And I feel like what the MSc program is doing is filling a huge gap for people in what I would consider to be the front end of their coaching life cycle. They're learning how to be technicians. Like, how am I just a better coach? I'm in front of my athlete, I'm in front of my team. How am I better at this? And I feel like educationally, like you said, we've identified a problem where I don't know if the education is really preparing people for that. Industry-wide, and I think it's changing now, and maybe it's just because of the circle that I'm in. But to your point, there becomes a second half of the coaching life cycle, right around, I think, like I said, our age, where it's like, okay, I've spent 10 to 15 years becoming an expert. And then what happens is what Daniel Priestley, I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Priestley, will say, is that expertise that is not visible is invisible, right? There comes a point where like your expertise has to be visible to, like, that's the world we live in now. It's no longer where you're just in this isolated place and you'll coach in your town. Like, there has to come a point in time where people buy from people. They don't buy ideas, they buy from people, and your ideas, your expertise has to be visible for people to buy from you. And I think coaches, we spend our lives empowering other people, where I think we get to a point where we want to empower and own our own lives, and then we don't have the skills to do it. Like, we don't have the skill sets. Like, there's this entirely different discipline that we need to develop that is not about S&C and is not about, everything that we've taught, biomechanics. It's about still taking the systems thinking, but applying it to this whole other domain that is equally important. And the Seth Godins and the James Clears, you named people that have nothing to do with S&C, like technically, but have everything to do with how a strength and conditioning coach is going to own the rest of their life. And when I asked you about, like, that's the problem that I wake up every morning, like, incredibly excited to tackle. Like, you're tackling the front end of the coaching continuum. And like, my life now is really becoming devoted to the second half of that continuum, which is how do S&C coaches take greater ownership of their lives? And it's through these skill sets. So like, you couldn't have given 3 better resources on the fly where I put you on the spot, because like, I think I think from an intuition point of view, and you are clearly someone with an entrepreneurial problem-solving mindset. That's what an entrepreneur is, somebody that solves problems. So when you said that, like, that speaks to who you are. But that's also what every coach is. They just don't realize it yet. And like, there's going to come this point where that problem we as an industry don't provide coaches with the tools for. And like, they're so fucking needed, man, because you get to 40 and you go, where do I start with this? And like, I feel like we need to start including some of that sooner in the development of our coaches, because it's coming, man. It's coming.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think it's a Naval. Is it Ravikant? I can't. I'm an awful pronouncer. And he says that everybody should learn two broad skills, which is learn how to build and learn how to sell. He's talking about that from like a, building products or whatever kind of maybe perspective. Right. But actually, the learning to build thing is just develop expertise and get really good at providing a solution to problems. And then the learning how to sell piece is then, okay, but there's always a whole nother layer of packaging, making that relevant to people, marketing that to people, putting yourself in front of people. And I think people listen to that and they think, oh, I don't want to own a business, or I don't want to be an entrepreneur, and so I don't need to worry about that piece. But no, but learning how to sell is also, how do you present yourself in an application? When you reach out to somebody to say, hey, would you be interested in, do you know how to present an offer to people? Do you understand? And it's just like almost like some really foundational, transferable things of psychology, which will impact every single thing that you do. And you're totally right. And that's something we've also talked about with the master's program, where we're going to work really hard as that group gradually gets bigger in terms of like the alumni network of just like business owners. Okay, there's a continuous connection of, yes, you might have got your certificate, but you have been through this process, and there will continue to be a support system in place for stuff that becomes, maybe as your career develops, you'll start thinking about new, probably slightly more personal problems. And I always think about that, like I had definitely transitioned into recognizing I need to understand learning how to sell, not in a cheesy way, but I started a podcast in 2019 purely because I was like, I need to get better at public speaking and asking good questions and being concise, which you might have realized I'm not particularly good at yet. And that was purely like, I recognize that I think I have some technical expertise, but I'm always going to be limited if I can't add these other broader sales related skills on. And I've always come back to that in my head, like learn to build, learn to sell. Loads of people right now are great builders, they're not great sellers. You obviously get the danger where some people are great sellers, but they aren't great builders in the first place, and they're kind of trying to hack the system a little bit. But it's all part of the game, right? It's all good fun.
Dude, Daniel Pink, again, I've referenced him once already, has a book called Selling is Human. And like you said, like this idea of every time you're in front of an athlete trying to teach them a concept, you are selling something, right? So it's not, oh, I'm a used car salesman. No, the idea is whenever you are trying to get someone else to see either who you are or what your point of view is, you are selling. So the better you can be at doing that, like honestly, the easier life gets. And again, just to piggyback, because I thought it was so interesting, like people think they have loads of really interesting conversations, and they think that they're really interesting and the people they talk to are interesting, until you try to have a podcast and you realize, like, asking the right questions, having the conversation move, making sure that the information is clear, like that shit's really hard. And the better you get at it, the better you get at everything else as a skill set. And like I said, man, it's one that our industry needs more than they realize. And I think the sooner they recognize it, the better off their lives, not just their careers, but their lives are going to be. And so thank you for that. I love that. Naval Ravikant, man, adding him in there too. Like,
he was going to be one of my top three, but I couldn't think of the name of the resource quick enough. But still, you can kind of see like all of that came from that personal development, professional development kind of side of things, right? Of just even evolving your skills. James Clear, understand how to change yourself and build better habits. Godin stuff, a lot of that is the sales side of skills, and then personal branding is just more of like a really broad, that'll influence everything that you do with how people see or perceive you. So more attention's got to go to that for people, for sure.
Dude, are there any direct contacts for you, is there a website where people can check out the MSc program, check you out? Instagram, you had mentioned that you're on now. Kind of where can people find you?
Yeah, Instagram's not particularly exciting just yet. Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you want to check out the program, Altus website, you'll see the MSc program link up at the top there, and you can go and read about it, download a prospectus, and maybe book in to have a chat with me. But yeah, my Instagram is r dot. Can't remember. Maybe I'll send it to you. This shows you how it's. Anyway, I'm Rich Clarke on Instagram. It's my honors my name. So yeah, happy to chat to people over on Instagram. Come say hey. Like I try and be pretty authentic and chill on there. But for more professional inquiries, you can email me. I've got an Altus email address, so r.clarke@altus.world. And if anybody wants to talk about things slightly more serious, that's the best way of doing it. If not, send me an Instagram DM, and yeah.
Dude, I feel like you changed your name too recently, didn't you? That's probably why you don't remember it, because it was like Arcad at one point, and then
it's still Arcad. Yeah,
okay.
it's like I think it's
underscore something.
Yeah, there's an underscore, there's a dot, there's something like that. It used to be different. It used to be different, right? I think I sat there, and this was probably last summer, and I think I'm sat having dinner in Phoenix with Stu and Nick and crew, and I think that for whatever reason we just started slating my Instagram and my social media, and it was just like, Rich, even your Instagram handle is too long and it's awful. So literally at the dinner table, sat down and gone, all right, let me think of a different one. So hence why it's broad and nondescript. But yeah, you just find me linked into things and through my regular names.
Dude, thank you so much, man. I know that you're super busy. I know that you're long overdue for a vacation, like a real one.
Mm-hmm.
I love catching up. I love chatting with you. And we should do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, man. Would love to. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, dude. Love it.